If more and more members of the tech community decide to abandon the political marketplace, then you're abandoning the entire conversation the country continues to have every single election cycle, except now it's happening without you.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. This episode was recorded in front of a live studio audience. We're diving into this current state of affairs for political programmatic advertising. Where do the major tech platforms stand in terms of their policies on campaign ads? What alternatives exist? And what can campaigners do to prepare for further disruptions? Joining us to discuss this and more is Matt Hedberg. Matt is the COO of RepublicanAds.com, our host and sponsor this evening. Thank you. Republican Ads is the only self-service, voter-targeted digital advertising platform built for conservatives by conservatives. We interviewed co-founder Andy Yates during an earlier episode of the podcast, and that will be linked in our show notes. So, Matt, let's do a quick recap of where things stand. So October 1st, just this week, Xandr and Microsoft implemented their ban on campaign programmatic advertising. We've got the policies that we're familiar with Facebook and Google, where there's a verification, ad disclosure database. TikTok has a full-on ban on political ads. Why are companies in the business of selling ads saying no to political advertisers?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons here. And let's just go down memory lane for a second. We're now 3 days after Microsoft pulled out of the political marketplace. Over my relatively short career in digital media buying in the political marketplace, I've seen Adobe pull out of the market in their DSP in 2020. LinkedIn banned political ads. I've seen Twitter ban political ads, bring those back this year. So obviously a major policy shift on that front. This isn't new to anyone that's worked in this space for more than a few cycles. And it's unfortunately becoming more and more common. So Microsoft, beyond just banning political campaign advertising, has pulled out of most public affairs advertising as well. And full disclosure, we have a seat on Microsoft Xandr. We were using them up until this point. They offer some unique inventory options that it was hard to obtain otherwise.
Like what?
Well, so for example, they have the rights to advertise on Netflix when the paid subscription for Netflix rolls out. It was a little bit of a canary in the coal mine when we realized that they weren't going to allow political advertising on Netflix when they made that purchase announcement. But pulling out of the marketplace entirely gives us no recourse except to find other partners to work with. And that's something that we're now used to. We ourselves have seats on 5 different demand-side platforms because we've realized over time that we can't depend on any single one partner in this marketplace to continue advertising in politics. We've seen more platforms pull out entirely than decide to simply change their policies to vet the advertisers and vet creatives, which is a standard I'm sure we could live with.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's particularly frustrating about this is it is a policy approach that doesn't really align with the solutions or the challenges that they're trying to address, right? So we have good examples from Meta and Google of how you can do this. You can verify campaigns. There's a database of it with candidates at the FEC that we can rely on and ensure that only vetted political advertisers are participating. And it's just so frustrating because I think a lot of these big tech platforms don't have the context of what's happening in political outside of digital. So with broadcast TV, with mail, direct mail through the U.S. Postal Service, we have very clear policies of if you are a political candidate, you get sort of pride of place for this political speech because we've deemed as a country that hearing from our candidates, our elected representatives is important. And these platforms, on the other hand, have said that kind of speech makes for uncomfortable choices for us, whether backlash from our employees, backlash from very vocal users. And so we'd rather just not deal with that at all. And I think it really is both frustrating from a policy perspective, but also from a how do we run campaigns? Because these decisions are being dropped on us in the middle of cycles, weeks before elections, things like that. And I think it really is a disservice to the country.
You brought up Meta. So only 1% of Meta's annual revenue during a political cycle comes from political advertising. 1%. And yet they've stayed in the political marketplace, despite the fact that their CEO gets dragged to testify in front of Congress with significant regularity. But they keep on moving. Now they institute blackout periods. They'll ban and censor certain candidates, which is its own entire separate discussion. But they, as a platform, have decided to remain as part of the conversation. Now, we started Republican ads originally to support down and mid-ballot candidates, the candidates that maybe don't know how to effectively build a digital platform, how to look at all the different players in the ecosystem. Now, their life becomes harder when they establish a relationship with a platform, and that platform pulls out of politics. If you are the top of the ticket campaign and you're spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising, you have an entire team to figure this out. If you are running for lieutenant governor in Arkansas and your demand side platform, which you're running your connected TV through, your display through, and your online advertising, pulls out in August of an election year, when all your media plans are baked and established, now you have to perform research and determine where you're going to take that spend. Who will actually accept that spend? Who on your team is actually trained to work on another demand side platform? How do you vet that new platform for fraud? Like, all of these considerations now thrown into your lap at exactly the wrong time.
So, Matt, what are we talking about here in terms of the impact on voters and their ability to hear from campaigns when we're shutting off access to different parts of addressable audience from paid advertising?
There's a significant consideration here to be made when you're trying to reach an audience for turnout. Now, if you're trying to turn out a moderate audience, you can target that moderate audience with a moderate message. If that capability is taken away from you and all you care about is turnout, you're going to do nothing but throw red meat into the water, because that will turn out members of the base. So a potential negative externality of this is that you end up removing messaging to the middle of the pack and pushing more and more communication to the fringes, which doesn't do anything to support discourse in our country.
So if you can't pay for those network effects, you've got to go get them organically through social media, earned media, things like that. That's obviously one consequence. I think there's the other reality that we are seeing a kind of the decline of local news. This is a big problem throughout the country if people aren't getting access to local news, local reporting. And so there's not that avenue for campaigns to talk to voters. So really, if you're going to get their attention, you've got to pay for it. Then you've got people watching fewer hours of linear TV. You've got radio in decline. So we're left with fewer and fewer options where people are actually spending their time to go and advertise. And I think it's going to lead to a less informed electorate.
I love you bring up local news. So local news is where we try to put at the top of the pack for placement in our supply path optimization. Because if you can put an advertisement next to someone's local news, it creates a significant degree of trust as compared to just buying across a national news site. Now, it's difficult to do because for every single race, you have to go through and create the appropriate number of sites and the appropriate publishers in that person's local market and try to buy ads in front of them. So the significant degree of research to find those publications, establish relationships with those publications. But it's something we've realized that our clients truly appreciate. There's the side benefit that is good for local news. The more advertising dollars that we can place on local news sites and TV stations, the better it is for those businesses to remain in business long term.
And I'm even starting to hear that there are some local news sites that are just saying we're not going to do political either for all the reasons that we discussed, which is crazy to me because their TV stations are going to make millions of dollars on political placements, but they're saying, oh, we don't want you on our website.
You have a lot of publishers that will buy against through a demand side platform, and they want to vet the creative when it goes through a connected TV spot. Entirely understandable. If they're worried about violent content or sexist content or something that just does not agree with their brand values, they have the final decision on whether to allow that through. but they're not saying we're banning political advertising in its entirety. They just want a little bit of editorial control about what goes through their network.
So let's talk about the voter turnout aspect of this, because I think that's another thing that goes unappreciated from our counterparts in tech world. The role of turning out voters to vote in these elections up and down the ballot falls to campaigns, right? It's not, there aren't local government organizations making sure that people are turning out to vote. This is largely privately funded. And so if we're not able to advertise as broadly as we are able, and more specifically, not able to advertise to where voters are actually consuming media and content, what does that do to our turnout picture?
Well, just like anything else, if you're not communicating a message to voters, they may not take an action. This is the same as persuading them to vote for you as it is turning them out to vote. And especially in a time of early voting, there has been a significant change on how digital media dollars are deployed. Past campaigns, going back 6 years, you had massive influxes of money held back and then spent right at the finish line. Now, if you wait until the last week to deploy a significant amount of your budget, you're not communicating with 30, 40, 50% of an electorate that may have already cast a ballot. If you're delivering advertising dollars to someone that has already cast a ballot, then you're wasting your candidate's money, full stop. A TV ad is not going to help a week out from the election if 30% of that media market has already voted.
So I think it's pretty clear that the unintended consequence of these policies is certainly a muting of civic life, right? And civic participation. And I think it's ultimately a cowardly approach from these otherwise very brave, innovative companies to deal with political speech, which is one of the biggest topics of our time. And hopefully we'll see kind of a cooling around the rhetoric about political advertising, and see that, these campaigns are not Cambridge Analytica psychographic psyops on our voters. We really just want to let you know who the Republican candidate is and when you should go vote. And we need to be able to repeat that message as many times as possible.
We all know that banning something is the easiest path you can take. There is no challenge to saying, I'm going to take my chips off the table and go home and leave the entire marketplace as a free-for-all. It doesn't help us communicate with voters. And there are other paths. Those other paths may be more challenging in terms of having conversations, making policies, adjusting policies, talking to both the right and the left to determine what pathway exists to success. But if you just pull out of the marketplace, there is no more conversation. It ends at that point. And if more and more members of the tech community decide to abandon the political marketplace, then you're abandoning the entire conversation the country continues to have every single election cycle, except now it's happening without you. And now it's happening without you as a buffer to potentially keep bad actors out of the space. Because if we have to turn wherever it is to continue delivering messaging, Lord knows what some of those options might end up being. Not us at Republican Ads, mind you, that is just political advertisers in general. They're going to find a way to communicate with voters.
Well, one of the things that we're seeing with these political ad bans and restrictions, especially on social media platforms, they're targeted at legitimate political actors, where if you say, I'm running political ads, they'll say, no, can't do that. And I'm curious to hear what impact, if any, we're seeing these policies on bad actors like scam packs or foreign adversaries. Is it a cat and mouse game where they're just going to figure it out and go to the easiest to manipulate path while we're fighting as legitimate candidates with one arm tied behind our backs?
Every single company, including us, that is trying to do the right thing in this space will abide by the regulations in place. And we do that in terms of data privacy. We do that in terms of DSP policies. We do that in terms of the laws of the land. A bad actor doesn't care about that. Most of the time, they're trying to just throw a grenade into the room and walk away. And they were able to exploit Facebook to do this in the past. There are actors that are able to exploit Twitter to do this. They will find a path. If they have money and they don't care about the rules, they will find a way to exploit little cracks in the ecosystem and still deliver negative messaging to any voters that they can as a means to disrupt an election. If we can't combat that with actual vetted messaging on behalf of political candidates attempting to make their case to the American people, we potentially leave a vacuum for others to come in and make that case that don't care about our election process.
So what's the right approach here policy wise? So obviously bans are too broad. They don't get the desired solution. And so how do we balance the need for reaching voters and protecting political speech while also recognizing that we want to make sure that the rails are kept on and that voters are getting accurate, truthful information?
So I know this isn't popular in this day and age, but can we just sit down and have a conversation? If you walk away entirely, you don't give us a chance to tell us why you might want to leave the political marketplace. We're more than happy to make suggestions as to what we're willing to accept to work with you. And this is not an easy process. If you open up a conversation, lots of people will not be happy with the final outcome. But you know what? We'll learn to live with it. We're sitting here complaining about you abandoning the marketplace entirely. I would assume it'll be a little bit less if the conversation was, we're instituting policy X, Y, and Z. We might complain a little, but we'll adjust and move on with our lives. We're used to challenges. We work in politics.
Yeah, I mean, we're perfectly happy to wait for a postcard to come in the mail so we can run Facebook ads. And so we've found that solution to be workable. I really think that the path forward is more akin to what we see in the broadcast space and postal mail. Obviously, that's easier to regulate because there's federal licenses and it can be legislated. But with more of the public square being built on private property, where we need these platforms to cooperate with us. One of the things that I think we could do is say, look, if you are a legitimate political actor, a candidate, you're registered as a PAC or a candidate, you are treated differently than other advertisers. And then we could say we're going to ban certain types of speech outside of these actors, but carving it out for politics, I think is probably the better approach. But it takes a little more nuance than we've been willing to see from their side.
I'm glad you brought up nuance because we're talking about the Postal Service and local radio stations being able to vet political advertising, yet somehow we're excusing a massive tech company like Microsoft from having that same responsibility. We know they have the capabilities to look at every single ad that crosses their platform. If they wanted to, they could have instituted a process where every single advertiser that used Microsoft registered with Microsoft. It would not be hard for them to keep track of that. We could reauthorize every single year if that's what it took to make sure that we were in compliance. But they decided to announce that they were leaving without any of those discussions taking place.
Well, I think we need to look forward to what are the solutions? What can political advertisers do to sort of prepare themselves for these changes and looking forward to, okay, what do we do about this? Because that's our reality. And as you said, we work in politics, so we figure it out.
This is exactly why I'm at Republican Ads. We built this company so that candidates wouldn't have to deal with the intricacies of putting your message in front of your voters. Now, our life is spent in the trenches finding the best potential path to get from that message to the voter. And that means having as many tech partners as possible. Like I mentioned, we consider ourselves a meta DSP. We run across multiple DSPs to find the best potential inventory at the best possible time. But outside of the advertising space, we also have to worry about how our backend servers are run. We need to maintain servers on Google and AWS because one of those members of the ecosystem could decide to say, we're not going to allow data storage of voter lists or any other information on our servers. And if we're not ahead of that curve, we run into that issue of, hey, our demand side platform left. What do we do? It is our job to remain ahead so that our candidates and agency partners don't have to. It's our responsibility.
So definitely starts with finding a partner like Republican Ads that's managing this risk, understanding the landscape. I think campaigns also have to be looking at their own audiences of email, of text message, of web traffic, and even tools like relational organizing, tapping into their volunteer base because we still have to get our message out and reach these voters. What are some of the ways that you see a tool or a platform like Republican Ads and others helping us build more of our own capacity rather than relying on others?
I mean, that's why we called it Republican ads as a starting point because we wanted to build this technology not just as a technology company, but as a technology company that serves conservative causes. And there's some amazingly intelligent people on our side of the aisle. Some of the difficulty is they go to the private sector after they finish a campaign because they are in demand and they have entrepreneurial skills and they want to do something else. But those people are out there. Like, you cannot just have a conversation, ask one or two questions when you're vetting a digital vendor. You need to get as far into the weeds as you possibly can with that organization or with that partner before signing off on them. Do not sign off on a digital vendor in January. Have a major change in technology in August and don't get a call from that person because they don't know what's happening and they're scrambling to try to adjust. That's the absolute worst case scenario you could face.
All right, so let's fast forward to that worst case scenario because we've already had that happen in recent cycles where we get down the path. We know that platforms can change their mind. You know, I've got budget allocated. I've got my creative aligned. I've got my targeting, and the rug gets pulled and they said no political advertising. What is someone left to do at that point?
Well, if you decided to work with Republican ads, you don't have to do anything because we'll just move that component of the buy to a platform that still continues to work in this space. Now, if political advertising is banned by law, well, we'll find another way to figure things out. But until that time comes, we have you covered.
All right. Well, I want to open it up for questions from folks. And so just keep in mind, I'm going to read. I'll say your question back to you for the audio. So please keep it brief. Otherwise, I will summarize it and you may not like it. So the question is about with uncertainty, specifically around, kind of that single point of failure with a DSP that could make the decision of we will not allow political advertising. What is the role of working with meta DSPs or multiple DSPs to sort of mitigate that risk?
All right. So at the core, it becomes a question of duplicative advantage, right? You end up with a multiplier effect. If you are running on one demand side platform and there's a policy change or that demand side platform leaves the marketplace, you have no recourse besides, let me just try to reach out to every other demand side platform, train my people, migrate my audiences and data, which could be difficult, get completely set up and learn how that DSP works during crunch time when you're supposed to just be flawlessly executing media. And the client doesn't really care what your struggles happen to be. They hired you to place digital media, and now they're not able to place digital media. So you're the one that they're gunning for.
Yeah, I think flexibility is always going to be the name of the game and anticipating that risk. I think the way we talk about it, it's almost like a retirement strategy. You don't pick one stock and say, I'm going to put all my retirement into that stock or crypto or something. You diversify your assets, you spread risk around, knowing that that risk is out there and you can't predict what it's going to be, but you're ready to respond to it.
Just to add on that again, we're also concerned about the walled garden effect from publishers. Now, Yahoo is an example of a DSP that we work with, and Yahoo will not allow political advertising against their owned properties unless you go to Yahoo first, because Yahoo wants a degree of creative control over what gets placed across their publishers. So we've seen this in other parts of the ad tech ecosystem where data is becoming essential. You need to find supply side partners that have unique inventory and integrate with them. Otherwise, you risk being left out in the cold if they just pull that back in-house.
Other questions from the crew here? So the question is about audience targeting, with the long-awaited, much delayed death of the third-party cookie, which is supposed to come any day now. And so what are the alternatives there? We know in theory it's going to come and eventually it'll be here. What do we do instead to target audiences, particularly for political, where we need that voter file targeting?
For those of you that don't know, I spent most of my career in ad tech working on data onboarding and data integrations. And I started doing this in 2013. And since then, you've had Google say they're going to ban cookies in 2 years and move that back twice. You've seen Apple implement ITP2, ITP, IDFA, which means that at this point you can't place third-party cookies on any Apple devices. You are allowed to place first-party cookies for a max of 7 days. They implemented private relay, which means they can obfuscate the IP addresses of individual users. And I spent a lot of time working on IP address targeting at Semcasting, who had some of the first patents to do this in the political marketplace. So it is an excellent question. I've seen cookies, IPs, devices all shift over 10 years of working in this marketplace. Now, Mr. Dubois mentioned contextual targeting, and that's certainly an option. We've looked at logged in publisher targeting in certain instances. I've done this a little bit in the medical space, targeting physicians on medical journals. A little bit in its infancy, has significantly small scale, so it's difficult to accomplish. I brought up local newspapers earlier. If we're targeting a race in a rural district and we know that there's a local publication, we can serve there potentially against that audience as a means of cutting out some of the waste. Geo-targeting is something that we firmly believe will become a significant player in this ecosystem and in technological ad tech writ large. It offers the ability to create different apertures of audience size. So you can target, a particular building, a particular neighborhood, an entire kilometer, and the ability to stay with me. The ability to scale that up or down means you can continue that level of targeting as privacy restrictions change. So if you have a state that eliminates the ability to target on a one-to-one basis, we'd be able to widen the aperture to include multiple households, as an example, and target in that way. And this is, we've done quite a bit of this in Europe, under the auspices of GDPR, where this is an ad tech solution that works for their marketplace. And if our data and privacy regulations follow theirs, it's certainly one that will come more and more to the fore. Now, your reaction was exactly correct. Certain cases, when I mentioned geo-targeting to political advertisers, they throw up their hands and roll their eyes, because we've been targeting on a one-to-one basis since political advertising technology began. And there are a lot of folks that don't believe there is anything else. And they'll keep believing there is no other way to target voters until that car drives off a cliff and there is no other option.
This comes down to a separation between strategy and tactics, right? So the overall strategy of online advertising is voters are spending time online, consuming media on these platforms, and we want to reach them with our campaign messages, whether that's persuasion, awareness, or turnout, or direct response. The tactics are, right now we have this ability to kind of very narrowly target in a lot of ways that we had with like mail or texting or door to door. As privacy regulations come into play, I think it's, the tactics are going to shift more towards broadcast type mediums, but the strategy of getting people where they are isn't going to change. And you're right. I think the writing is on the wall with GDPR that some standard like that, where you have to get explicit permission from a user to be able to target them with data, it is going to become the standard in the United States, because all it takes is one state to adopt that, and it's probably going to be California, and then the rest of the platforms will follow suit.
I mean, at this stage, we are an all of the above shop. We match to cookies when and where we can. We match to IP addresses. We use mobile device IDs where that's possible. We also use selective lat long. It's the only way to get as close to 100% coverage of your voters as possible.
Other questions? Yes, sir. Questions about where do we see a CTV audience measurement improving over the next cycle?
This is going to sound glib, but I'm going to say hopeful, because there isn't a heck of a lot of quality measurement now. It's a difficult marketplace to be buying connected television currently. There are a lot of nefarious actors out there, and it's a significant degree of fraud in the marketplace. If you, like I do, start diving into individual lines of inventory reports and log level data of where you're buying, when you don't specifically designate publishers, you'll end up with unknown inventory. You'll buy a connected TV spot, but the operating system comes back tied to a mobile phone because someone's selling you connected TV at a much higher price point, but delivering that placement at a much smaller screen. But unless you dive into that data, you wouldn't know. And I think this is a place I would love our demand side platform partners to help us out. Now, we build our own inventory controls and checks. We'll set up specific deals on specific publishers and buy against those because we know we can control that environment. If we start sprawling beyond that to just buy open market inventory on connected TV, the quality disappears very quickly at that point. And it's not an environment that we can easily control. So we generally don't buy into it. And one of the things that we've rolled out on our platform is the ability to see what placements your campaign is running on. And that exists for your display campaigns, your online video campaigns, and your CTV placements. Because it's not up for us to say, just trust us. We will buy the best possible inventory at the best possible price for you, unless the client can see with their own eyes.
One quick question there. With the ACR, automated content recognition, does that help at all? I know that's something some other folks in the space are working on, of being able to measure CTV, provided you're on that type of device.
It helps if the inventory made available for you to purchase is measurable. And sometimes we don't get some of those measurement statistics back before you buy a placement, in which case we're not going to buy a placement. I mean, I've seen ACR talked about more than used in many cases, unless you're putting a pitch deck together and you say, all right, we're going to use ACR data to find the people that our opponent just showed an ad to, or the people our opponent didn't show an ad to. And then you create these smaller and smaller niche audiences to deliver almost no budget against. And it sounds great. It's a wonderful talking point. But if you're just following your opponent's messaging strategy around, you're not going to be ahead of the pack.
Well, my thanks to Matt and the RepublicanAds.com team for a great conversation. Click on the link in our show notes to learn more about Republican Ads. Get in touch with them. If this episode made you a little bit smarter, all that we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague, because you look smarter in the process and more people learn about the show. So it's a win-win. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to find out about forthcoming events like this one, go to businessofpoliticspodcast.com, sign up for our email list. And with that, I'll say thanks for listening for 100 episodes. We'll see you next time.